Hi, Dan Verton, Executive Editor with MeriTalk. I'm here today at the Cybersecurity Brainstorm with Mr. Paul Christman from Dell. Paul, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So Paul, we're going to talk a little bit about cybersecurity today and understanding the basics. Having a basic set of foundational controls in place is really critical today. I'm thinking of course, of the NIST cybersecurity framework and other types of frameworks. Where are federal agencies and private companies today in terms of their ability to have that level of basic control in place?
Yeah, the basic controls are actually one of the most challenging parts, and it's really where the cybersecurity framework starts in that whole identify category. And one of the most challenging things is to actually identify all the assets that are in an IT infrastructure. It's one of the most challenging things for anyone to, first of all, gather, and then second of all, to maintain. But without it, your inability to manage the cybersecurity profile of the risk because you don't know the surface area that you're trying to protect. I mean, you're really starting with both hands tied behind your back.
Right, right. You know, I get the impression today that we're very much still in a reactive mode. When you look at things like the OPM data breach, you have a 30-day cybersecurity sprint. After the fact, there's nothing you can do about it, but nonetheless, we learned that, okay, we have problems that went unaddressed. How do we get the government at the agency level to shift from being reactive to being proactive about security? Because that's really a central problem today.
We have to get away from what I call a passive defense that talks about looking at virus signatures, looking at malware signatures, protecting and preventing exclusively as opposed to responding and improving. And that idea of a passive defense, I think, doesn't move into an active role where you're going to counter cyber, but where you're really going into an active defense, where you're looking at more things like CDM, more behavioral analytics of people who are on the network, rather than just saying, okay, you've got a credential, you're allowed in, you can do whatever you want. That idea of moving to an active defense really is a mindset shift that's been happening over the last couple of years. It really looks at how do we analyze the behavior of users in their network to improve the cybersecurity posture of the organization. But then we really do need to have proper response and remediation and improvement. And so that idea of response and react is not going away, it just needs to be complemented by proper prevention and also this idea of an active defense.
Okay, yeah, I want to talk to you about the response effort in a second. But you know, that reminds me of Terry Halverson, our viewers will know, as CIO of Defense Department, recently said as late as a week ago, he wants to automate as much of the basics of cybersecurity hygiene as possible. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, you have to automate. The volume of data that's being generated by the systems is absolutely incomprehensible to human beings without the assistance of automation and machines to do the sifting, the first pass. We do a lot of work with customers who are looking at insider threat, and that insider threat behavior data is so vast that you need to automate. And again, automation is one of those things that gives you an exponential opportunity to improve your ability to respond. Without automation, you're really going to be looking at this almost with paper and pencil.
Right.
You can't do it. There's too many devices, too many new kinds of devices, too many pieces of data that are being spit up that you're trying to correlate. And without automation, you're really not going to be able to get the job done. You have to get rid of the baseline through machines and then get the sophisticated work with the analysts after the first pass is done with the automated machines.
You know, another area where I think we still have a lot of work to do is in identity management. Two-factor authentication, just basic knowing that people are who they say they are when they're on the network. How do we accomplish that in a more timely fashion? Because it seems like still, you look at every survey today, many agencies are still behind on that.
So we were really pleased at the results of the cybersecurity sprint, focusing on this idea of stronger authentication, not just simple password, username, credentialing. The control not only of your rank and file users, but also your privileged users. So we were really pleased that that was a focus for the cybersecurity sprint. The rules and the mandates for things like PIP or CAC in the federal space have been around for years and years and years. The sprint really pushed the adoption up. So we take a different look at the idea of a privileged user And we get away from this idea of two-factor authentication, or we get away from this idea of a username and password even, and we talk about no password. And Terry's talked about this before, death to the password. Well, if you're going to say there's no such thing as password and credentials are all on the fly with zero passwords, that's a challenge I think that's too far for the rank and file. We're still going to use passwords. We're going to strengthen them with two-factor. But for the privileged users, I think we're going to get to one-time use, never-known passwords, so that we're going to get away from compromised credentials for super users, because they won't have any known credentials that can be compromised.
Now let's return to your point about the response. At the end of the day, if you really think about it, agencies can be doing all the right things. They can have the basic cybersecurity controls in place, they can have two-factor authentication, and they can still fall victim to a cyber attack. How important and how do they accomplish that response and recovery step in this process?
Yeah, good question. And the idea of response, an appropriate response, starts at the beginning. And if we look at the NIST cybersecurity framework, it really is designed in from the beginning. It talks about behaviors, it talks about policies, it talks about humans that are going to do certain things in the event of some sort of cyber event. A breach is one thing, a cyber attack is another. There's various responses that are appropriate depending on what's actually happened. So we design it in from the beginning with the human element in a response plan that's documented, it's appropriate, it's tested, it's proven, it's improved, just like any other disaster response. The idea really needs to be that it's designed from the beginning to be part of the entire methodology, the framework. It's really, really important that we understand you will have some sort of cyber incident, whether it's a denial of service attack, which you can't stop, but you can respond to appropriately. The idea of response and then improvement is really the closed loop improvement system that we really need to get to.
Right. Great. Paul Christman of Dell, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Enjoyed the conversation.
I'm Dan Verton with MeriTalk. Thanks very much for watching.